Hi folks, my name is Mike Dobbs and I'm your host here on Government Matters here on Focus Springfield. Today we've got another state senator, State Senator Jake Oliveira, whose district includes Ludlow, Granby, parts of Springfield, Indian Orchard, right?
12 communities, and Indian Orchard unfortunately is out of it now.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Pardon my.
It's only one-eighth of the city in Ward 7 and Ward 6.
Okay,
so East Forest Park and part of Forest Park.
You still have a little chunk.
Little chunk.
So this is Jake's first term as a state senator. He's had significant legislative experience before, but as we were talking a little bit off camera, you're finding the differences out between the House and the Senate and serving as a state rep versus as a state senator.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting, you know, our House colleagues joke that when a House member moves from the House to the Senate, the collective intelligence of both bodies goes up.
Well, there's a number of things I'd like to talk to you about today, but on the top of my mind is the fact that you are, and I'm consulting my notes so I can make sure I say this correctly, the Vice Chair of the Joint Committee on Tourism, Arts, and Cultural Development for the state.
Correct.
And the reason I want to bring this up first, and I know you were there because we saw each other, Lieutenant Governor Kim Driscoll was in town recently. She gave an address at the Elms College at their annual leadership event. And she spoke a little bit about tourism and its importance. One thing she mentioned is that the Healy-Driscoll administration, I believe, has appointed a new person to head up state tourism. And the Lieutenant Governor spoke fairly at length about the fact that as the mayor of Salem, she understands how important tourism is. I'll be frank with you, it sort of shocked me that Salem is the #3 highest tourist destination in the Commonwealth. And in fact, the Lieutenant Governor made a remark about they figured out how to make Halloween last 1 month in Salem. So considering where we are, we're sitting next door to the casino. Down the road is Six Flags. Across the river is the Eastern States Exposition and all that stands for. The Basketball Hall of Fame. Up the street we've got the Dr. Seuss Museum, a memorial sculpture garden. Just within a radius of like 2 miles, we have a tremendous amount of tourism destinations. And we know this because we know how many people come up. But obviously we could be doing more. And in your position as vice chair, I was wondering if you have thoughts about tourism marketing budgets, if you have thoughts about partnerships maybe between some of these entities, like can Six Flags work with a Hall of Fame? Can they work with MGM? Can we build coalitions to help market what we do here? I'm just curious about what you're hearing on the committee and what you would like to see done.
Well, first off, it's an honor to be vice chair of the committee, but it's a very Western Mass focused committee in its leadership structure. So the chair of that committee is Mindy Dahm from Amherst, and the chair on the Senate side is actually Paul Mark from the Berkshires. So Western Mass has a nice footprint in the leadership of that committee. And working with our Regional Tourism Bureau, working with Mary Kay Wydra, who's the head of the Tourism Bureau for the greater Springfield area, it's also about creating events to bring people in from the outside. And many people don't know this, but 1 out of 6 jobs in Western Massachusetts is tied directly to the creative economy. That means if you're going out to eat, if you're going to a show, if you're going to the symphony, if you're going to MGM, it's tied to that tourism economy and that creative economy as a whole. Working with Mary Kay Wydra, we were able to attract 2 major events here to Western Massachusetts just in the last couple of weeks, including Hooplandia, which was at the Big E just last weekend. We also had here an Ironman competition that came right through the city of Springfield. And what people might not realize about each one of those events that we've attracted to Western Massachusetts and to the Pioneer Valley is that people don't just go for those events. They stay overnight. You know, if you're in an Ironman competition, that's a weekend-long event where you're bringing your family, your significant other, and you're staying, you're going to the hotels, you're going to the restaurants, you're going to the casino, you're indulging in all the cultural opportunities we have to offer. But it's even beyond just bringing people in. It's also celebrating some of the cultural experiences that we have. Proud to say, as a proud Polish American, we have the Polish Learning and Discovery Center in the city of Chicopee, and we're actually working with them and doing a press conference in a couple of weeks on a bill that I filed to actually invest more into the creative economy here in Western Massachusetts, working with the creative sectors in each one of our communities in order to rise and pay a little bit more attention to that creative economy. Those are some of the bills that we're working on this session. It'll be before the Joint Committee on Tourism, Arts, and Culture. And we're also bringing our colleagues out to Western Massachusetts. We have the opportunity through the committee to highlight certain things in our district. And so over the next few months, we'll be bringing legislators from the eastern part of the state, from the South Coast, from Central Mass, out to Western Massachusetts to see all the array of activities that we have to offer.
So does our region rank at least in the top 5 in terms of destinations?
Oh, it does. Actually, when you look at tourism, obviously the Boston area is the largest. Pioneer Valley is actually right behind that. It's actually higher than Berkshire County. It's higher than the North Shore. It's higher than the South Shore. It's actually a destination, and happy to share the statistics with you, but it is a destination from all of the activities that we just mentioned, including some of the regional activities. You look at the Big E. You look at things that bring people to the many colleges and universities, whether it's graduation or accepted students day. We're bringing people from all across the country and in the world to the Pioneer Valley to enjoy the natural beauty that we have and share in some of those cultural experiences.
So I know that during the summer months, Amtrak runs trains from New York City into the Berkshires, specifically because they understand there's a number of New Yorkers who want to come up to Tanglewood or Jacob's Pillow or to Great Barrington, to any of these communities. And I know we have plenty of Amtrak trains linking Union Station with Penn Station. But I was wondering, when your committee discusses things, do they often talk about marketing budgets, like to aim a marketing effort like at the greater New York area that, yes, all of these things up here are simply a train ride away, an easy train ride away. Are there talks about how much the state should get involved in actually actively marketing tourism activities?
We have been talking and actually focusing in a lot of our neighboring states, but also well outside of New England, including in places like Texas and in Florida, where they might be hostile to certain members of the LGBTQ plus community. So we're marketing Massachusetts as a destination to go because we accept everybody. We're inclusive. We are a state that wants to be as inclusive as possible. And so the Berkshire Flyer is a perfect example of coming up, the Hudson Valley and then going into Pittsfield. And I've taken the train several times from Union Station here in Springfield right to Penn Station. It's an easy ride, and I've actually taken it as far as Washington, D.C. It's a wonderful ride. It's an easy ride to take. So I don't think we should be just limiting ourselves to our neighboring states like Connecticut and New York, but places like Pennsylvania. And places like New Jersey and places like Maryland and the DC area to come up to escape, some of the, the urban centers that are out there, to be in an open air area such as Western Massachusetts and enjoy everything we have to offer. We are looking at it much more in a regional way. And I know that the Healy-Driscoll administration is focused on that type of aspect of attracting people to other states, not just to visit here, but to possibly even move here and live here and grow our population.
So are there any bills pending in the Senate or the House that would relate to the further development of tourism and cultural economies here?
We have about, I think there were close to 70 bills before our committee this session. It's one of the smaller committees, having 7,000 bills filed each session, having, in the range of 50 to 100. Many of them have to do with promoting Massachusetts outside of our borders, but also laying down the transportation systems. Even though there's only a handful of bills before the committee, committee, there are bills to improve our transportation network to bring people outside that are before the Transportation Committee, that are before other committees before the legislature. So over the next year or so, as the committees begin to release their bills and make recommendations to the full body, we want to make sure we're looking at each one of those bills through a regional equity lens to make sure Western Massachusetts is prioritized when we're marketing the state as a whole.
Excellent. So another thing I got to bring up is that you're also on the Joint Committee for Municipalities and Regional Government. And what I'm curious about there is, you know, we have, what is it, 351 or is it 361?
351 cities. We used to have 355, but we flooded 4 of them.
Okay, well, you know, you always go with your first answer, as they tell you in the high school. So we have 351 communities, and even though there's many similarities between many of these communities, for sure, at the same time, some of their governmental needs are going to be quite different. Are there efforts on that committee when you talk about regional equity to try to balance some stuff out between larger communities and smaller communities in terms of state funding and state services?
We've actually done a lot in that area, even over the last few months that we've been in session. So I happen to be chair of regional government, or of municipalities and regional government this session. So I chaired a hearing just last week with over 50 bills. Most of them have to do with home rule changes to the communities. So looking at things like changing a charter, if you're moving from a town meeting form of government to a town administrator, manager, council form, or to a mayor form of government, or changing the name, which has been very popular right now, from boards of selectmen to select boards. I happen to represent Wilbraham. Wilbraham, just up until a couple of weeks ago, on their board of select men, had 3 women. It was an all-female board. So we're hearing a lot of bills about charter changes, including from some Western Mass communities, to look at how we can better reflect the changing nature of communities right now, but also giving municipalities the tools that they need in order to help themselves. There's a bill pending before a committee that we heard last week having to do with cable access stations and allowing for more flexibility in order to allow funding to go through them.
And we're hoping you support that.
I'm very supportive of it, and I've already said that we're going to move that bill and expedite it through the committee process very quickly. But we've done things on the Senate side to look at that regional equity issue for local funding. So on the Senate version of our Chapter 90 bill, which is the lifeblood for roads, bridges, culverts, sidewalk repairs, we put in a brand new $25 million pot of funds for low densely populated communities. Obviously, Springfield and Chicopee aren't them, but I have many of my communities like Hamden, Wilbraham, Belchertown, Granby, Palmer, Warren, that would all benefit on this pot of funds that don't necessarily see the larger share of funding through the regular Chapter 90 funding formula. I hope, as we move through the conference committee report, that the House will agree with the Senate and put this pot of funds in that communities in Western Massachusetts can access for greater funding. We also did things in the Senate budget of investing in regional transportation agencies. So the Senate utilized some of the fair share dollars from the millionaire's tax that the voters voted to put in place last November. The Senate added $100 million more to regional transportation. So outside of the MBTA catch region for transportation authorities like PVTA right here in the Pioneer Valley that can experiment with free fare programs. And so the Senate budget really is investing in those regional equity issues to invest in our low density populated communities in Western Massachusetts. And I'm hopeful that when we wrap up, hopefully by the end of the session, the FY24 budget, the House will agree with the Senate and invest in those areas.
Just speaking quickly about the budget, where is it standing since it's like the end of June, sir?
We did just pass, and the governor signed in a temporary 1-month budget in order to get us through the hump. most of the time, the House takes up their budget in April, Senate took up our budget in May, and there were some significant differences between both versions of the budget. So a conference committee was appointed to hash out those differences. We're adjourning at the end of July, so it is, I'm fairly confident that both versions of the budget will be resolved by that date, and so we can have an FY24 budget by the end of July when this temporary budget holdover, carryover budget runs out.
I know, because that's been a concern in years past about having the House and the Senate work things out, so when the budget year is supposed to start, the budget year can actually start.
And there are three conference committee reports that we're working on right now. The first is the FY24 budget. The second is the tax relief package, and there are significant differences between the approach the Senate took and the approach the House took, and then the Chapter 90 transportation funding bill. So all three of those are in conference right now. I was just meeting with, I was on the phone with the chair of Ways and Means on the Senate side, my old boss, Mike Roderick's, earlier this week, and they've been meeting, working through the differences to resolve it within the next couple of weeks.
Now, one thing you just mentioned, which is always sort of a topic that I've focused on, is how the regional transit authorities are funded. Because the MBTA actually gets a percentage of the Massachusetts sales tax, so it has a dedicated funding source. But that is not replicated with the PVTA, which is the second largest regional transit authority in the state, or with any of the other transit authorities. Do you think that you'll ever see like a dedicated funding source up front, which is what the MBTA has, being applied to these other regional transit authorities?
Well, it's my hope that the House will agree with the Senate's approach to the FY24 budget, because we utilized, which is obviously going to be much more of a pool of funds for us to access for transportation and education through the Fair Share Amendment. We dedicated more of the percentage of those fair share dollars towards regional transportation than the House version of the budget did. And so the House actually invested more in the MBTA. We invested more in the regional transit authorities. And so I can see us moving forward, and it's my hope that we can splice out some of those funds that we'll be receiving from the Fair Share Amendment that can go directly to regional transit authorities. I'm a proud member of the Regional Transit Caucus in the legislature, which is a fairly large caucus. But one of the big differences between the House and the Senate is that our leadership on the Senate side comes from outside of 128. The chair of Ways and Means comes from the Fall River area, which is in a regional transit authority. The president of the Senate comes from the Metro West area, which is in a regional transit authority. And so I think, on our side of the building, we're taking much more of an approach at looking at things like regional transportation as ways in which we can invest some of these new dollars that are coming into the Commonwealth.
Well, finally, I'll just say, the problem that we face is that the need for regional transportation is increasing, especially with the effects of climate change, the effects of how many cars are on the road. But at the same time, if we Google MBTA, you know what we're going to get. So much focus is placed on, in terms of the state's awareness, on fixing the MBTA. And sometimes I think, well, hey, do you know that there's working people who need a bus in Springfield or Holyoke or Westfield or Chicopee or Greenfield or Northampton? Their needs are the same as anyone else's needs in the eastern part of the state. It's just this regional transit system isn't the same and hasn't been given the same chance.
Exactly, and so all of us in the Western Mass delegation, whether we're House members or Senate members, we speak as one voice on this issue. Just about all of us are members of the Regional Transportation Caucus, and we are constantly making the case that the MBTA doesn't benefit people in Western Massachusetts. What we need to invest in is our regional transportation authorities. I've actually filed a bill this session, and there was actually a little bit of a forum at the State House just yesterday with the Environmental League of Massachusetts and the Sierra Club. The bill that I have filed this session is actually to electrify our regional transit authority systems and give the resources to the regional transit authorities in order to electrify and reduce our carbon footprint with the buses that are on our streets right now. And so I'm very proud to partner with all of those organizations, really combating the issue of climate change. That's our greatest existential threat. You know, when Springfield has been labeled for over a decade as the asthma capital of the country, we see the effects of climate change up close and personal right here in the Pioneer Valley, and taking steps in order to provide more opportunity for public transportation, but public transportation that's electrified and doesn't rely on fossil fuels is something that we're looking to invest in.
Excellent. Thank you, sir. One more transportation question, just because I'm obsessed on this. Sorry. What's the status of East-West Rail? I mean, I know that the new administration has appointed, I believe, a director, which, as I understand it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is a necessary position in terms of accessing some federal funds. The feds want this person. So are you seeing forward movement, do you think, in that?
Seeing a lot of movement, and there were actually some moving parts just recently on that actual point. And you're not the only one who's obsessed with it. I'm obsessed with it as well.
Okay.
Driving the Massachusetts Turnpike in heavy traffic, which should take me an hour and 10 minutes to get from my house in Ludlow right off the pike to the State House, and it takes over 2.5 hours. Spending 5 hours in the car, I see it firsthand of how detrimental it is just to your physical and personal psyche when you're sitting in traffic for that long. West-East Rail is right on the cusp. We're waiting right now on a report by the Joint Committee on Transportation that was chartered by the Transportation Bond Bill that we passed last summer in order to look at the structure of West-East Rail. That report should be out shortly within the next couple of weeks. That will guide our work going forward. But the governor's transportation bond authorization that was just released last week included dollars for the Palmer and Pittsfield station improvements that are essential for the vitality of the West-East Rail project. Once that commission report comes out and the director is in place, it will allow us to access the multitude of federal resources coupled with state dollars here in the Commonwealth in order to invest in fixing the tracks, particularly between Palmer and Worcester, which tends to have the slowest speed. And so many of the investments that we'll do to make it a viable project will take place on that route between Palmer and Worcester in order to straighten the tracks out and make sure we can reach higher speeds to make it a viable option. So there are a lot of moving parts, but there are some great steps forward that we've had just in the last few weeks with it.
I know you get out and about in your district, and I'm just wondering, you know, what are people talking about with you? What are some of the concerns that they express to you as their state senator? I'm
hearing a lot about mental health. Mental health challenges, and this cuts across your socioeconomics, this cuts back, gender, this cuts across, age. People are worried about their mental health as we kind of emerge from the pandemic and the isolation that so many people felt. Well, my dad's a teacher, and he saw the impact of the last 3+ years on the students that he served. When I talked to the business community said we can't have productive people working if they're needing to take care of their own mental health or the challenges of a loved one within their family. I know the Senate will be prioritizing this session, and we're working very closely with the Senate President's office on developing a comprehensive mental health bill to address some of the needs that we have here in the Commonwealth. And the regional equity lens of it is very important as well. Up until a few short weeks when a new facility opens, there isn't a single youth mental health bed in all of Western Massachusetts.
Wow.
That is staggering. I worked with a family as a member of the House from Indian Orchard when it was part of my district that had to take her child to some place on the other side of Worcester, and she had transportation issues and couldn't see her child for weeks at a time. My sister works at Wing Memorial in Palmer and worked in their ER unit, and you'd have children that are in the pods for mental health units for weeks at a time in a small, 8x6 room pod that's more like a prison prison cell because there wasn't a mental health bed available. Working with our colleagues on the House side and working with the Joint Committee on Mental Health, which Senator John Velas from across the river chairs, we're working on ways in which, to address those issues. I also have a bill this session that I filed working with a lot of our nursing associations and hospital partners to direct the Department of Public Health to do a regional equity study of the lack of beds and the lack of access to health care here in Western Massachusetts. I see that as something that people are talking about quite often, and it's something that we're going to tackle this legislative session.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm looking at the clock, and I know what I'm supposed to do now, and you've already been briefed, which is we like to ask elected officials why they wanted to be an elected official and what kind of path were you on that ultimately has led you to the Massachusetts State Senate. And I know that you've been involved with government basically since high school, if I remember correctly.
Actually, middle school.
Okay. I was wrong. I thought high school was further enough back. But obviously, you've had an interest in government basically your entire life.
Well, it starts at home a lot of times. You know, my parents weren't involved in politics. They never served in elected office, but they always did one thing. They always exercised their right to vote. And they used to take me into the voting booth when I was younger. And my dad, my dad and mom, if you look at their records, they have never missed a vote for the last probably 40 years. And that's something that they're very proud of, and they've instilled it in me and my sister, whether it's a local election, a state election, national election. Get out there and exercise your constitutional right to vote. And so I've always been instilled with that sense of civic duty right from the get-go. But my parents always talked about politics, even though that they weren't involved with it. It was always part of our dinner conversation.
Sure.
And I remember when I was 10 years old in 1996, just down the road from here in Court Square, President Clinton was speaking during his re-election campaign and supporting Senator John Kerry, who was being challenged by sitting Governor Bill Weld at the time, was doing a campaign rally in Court Square. And I went on that cold early or late October, early November day with my dad and listened to President Clinton speak. But the real kind of moment that kind of triggered my interest in politics was actually in 8th grade when I got elected treasurer of my class. There were 7 or 8 candidates, and I remember how nervous I was to make a speech on the intercom system to the entire school. And so that kind of, when I won that race, it kind of got me involved. I said, oh, this is kind of interesting. But really where I saw that positive change of how your voice can impact change within your community was actually in high school. We had about 1,000-person high school in Ludlow at the time, and the administration of the school actually shut down most of the bathrooms because of, you know, naughty behavior that kids do, smoking, doing those types of things. And I remember I was very upset by that, and I would, you know, not go to the bathroom all day and hold it because I didn't want to go in a dingy bathroom that didn't have doors on it.
Right.
And I remember being elected to the student rep to the Ludlow School Committee and actually talking about that issue and saying this is a health violation. Absolutely. And so that voice of being able to speak truth to power when I was in high school allowed for the opening of those bathrooms back up again. And I saw that if you saw a problem and you wanted to find a way to fix it, you can use your voice at that level to impact positive change. So I say now that you know, my career in public service started in the bathroom.
Well, you spent considerable time on the school committee in Ludlow. So certainly educational issues that may have been peaked when you were a student, you carried on as an adult, young adult, actually being someone who was determining policy. And was that an experience that logically just made you think about serving in the House and then ultimately the Senate?
It absolutely did. So, you know, working in high school, sitting on the school committee, going off to college and sitting on a board of trustees, and then coming back to my hometown in Ludlow when I was 22 and running for the school committee and serving 12 years there, I saw the impact that the state had on our local school districts. And my service on the school committee was very fulfilling. It was wonderful, and we did a lot of great work within the school district. But I knew that in order to impact education, the legislature was the route to do it. And I filed about 57 bills this session, and most of them, I'd say a good half of them, have to do with education, whether it's K through 12 or public higher ed or early childhood education. Many of them having to do with financing of our education system, which the state plays a significant role. I fought hard to pass the Student Opportunity Act that's investing in places like Springfield and Chicopee significantly, but we can't stop there. Special education costs are rising, far outpacing the rate of inflation. And so I filed a bill this session to basically create what led to the Student Opportunity Act, the Foundation Budget Review Commission, to do a similar commission for special education costs and find a way that the state can invest more to help out our school districts that are seeing double-digit inflationary increase in special education costs each and every year. And local taxpayers, the folks that are paying property taxes, the people that are paying rents that are going up and rising right now are tied directly back to those large increases in special education costs.
Senator, I know we could talk much more, but I want to thank you very much for coming in today. We'll have you in again because we like to tell people what is happening in the State House, and they frequently don't get that information as well as they should.
Absolutely.
So we appreciate you coming.
Anytime. Thanks.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
And folks, thanks for watching another episode of Government Matters right here on Focus Springfield.